Well, let's speak now to the journalist Nick Wallis, who's been investigating this scandal for years and has written the book on it, The Great Post Office Scandal, and was consultant on that ITV drama, Mr Bates versus the Post Office, which has, again, brought this story to the forefront of the public consciousness. Nick, great to have you with us this afternoon. Before we go into sort of some of the background on how this story has now come back into the public consciousness. What do you make of the Prime Minister's call saying that he would back the CBE being potentially removed from Paula Venables?
Well, the government gave Paula Venables that CBE. She left the Post Office in 2019 when it was mired in an attritional litigation against the 555 sub-postmasters who'd been trying desperately for years to get access to justice and to finally have their version of the truth approved by the courts. She slipped away at the beginning of 2019 with that CBE in her back pocket. She was given a seat on the Cabinet Office board and the chairmanship of a large NHS trust. She was being rewarded, effectively, for what she did to the sub-postmasters by the government. So to see them slowly, over a period of 4 years, come to the point where they say they might support the removal of her CBE is an interesting development, to say the least. You'll have to forgive me if there's any cynicism in my voice about this. They are reacting to events, the politicians, the government. They're not actually directing things properly.
And very tempered language as well, Nick. What do you think that those affected are going to be thinking right now? I mean, obviously you've known them quite closely for the past many years in the work that you have done. What do you think they will be feeling right now as the sort of this slow drip of trying to make this right goes on?
Well, Alan Bates was offered an OBE in the New Year's Honours List last year, and he turned it down on account of the fact he felt that the whole honours system was devalued. Why should he accept an OBE when Paula Venables still had a CBE? The sub-postmasters are fed up. We are currently in the third phase of this scandal. The first phase is when so many innocent people were prosecuted. The second phase is the government and post office cover-up, which went on from 2013 to 2019. We're now in the third phase of this scandal, which is the incredibly sclerotic nature of the authorities' response now that the sub-postmasters have proved their case. Why is it that more than 3 years after some of these compensation schemes were set up, so many people are still waiting to receive their full and final compensation? Why is it that so few convictions have been overturned? And why is it that still no one has been held accountable for this? I appreciate there's a public inquiry going on, but it's been going on for 2 years. It's got another year to go. We're in the fourth year of a police investigation into whether or not there's any criminal liability against any individuals. And no charges have been laid and no one's even been arrested. So you can understand it if the sub-postmasters, there is an element of exasperation that comes into the interviews that you do with them, because they just want to put this behind them. That's what I hear time and time again. They want their redress, they want their compensation, they want to see people held accountable, but most of all, they just want to forget that this ever happened. They don't want to wake up thinking about how the post office ruined theirs and their families' lives.
And of course have clean criminal records as well. Nick, talk to us about part two of the three issues that you think are at play here, the sort of the potential cover-up over what happened. Give us some more detail on that and your feelings around that. Where do you think there was a cover-up and what was being said at the time?
Well, the Post Office in 2012 were persuaded by the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance and the then James Arbuthnot, now Lord Arbuthnot, who was an MP, Joe Hamilton's MP, one of the sub-postmasters who featured in the ITV drama, to get independent investigators into the Post Office to have a look at the Horizon IT system, this accounting system which sits on the counter of every single post office in the country, and find out whether there was anything wrong with it. Now, Second Sight spent a year investigating inside the Post Office, and their conclusions in 2013 proved beyond all reasonable doubt that there were serious issues with the Horizon IT system and the Post Office's business processes and its prosecution function. Now, after that, everything went completely bonkers within the Post Office. We know, we've seen these internal documents now which have been coming out in the various court cases. They did everything they could to minimise and suppress the damage. They commissioned secret reports which revealed to them that they had potentially falsely prosecuted dozens, if not hundreds, of innocent sub-postmasters. They chose to suppress that information and not give it to Parliament and not give it to the campaigners. That's the cover-up.
Yeah, and Nick, what's so remarkable about this is that, postmasters, postmistresses, those who run the post office, are pillars of the community. They're an important part of many communities. And the idea that the computer system will be believed over these hundreds and hundreds of people for so many years, I think is what is so remarkable, that this scandal was able to go on for quite so long.
Well, there are two problems there, and they're both cultural. The first was that the post office did not have enough people with IT awareness or understanding working within its building. It had basically outsourced its entire IT function to Fujitsu, who were busy telling the post office that there was nothing wrong with the IT system and nothing to see here in terms of problems. The other thing was a cultural distrust of sub-postmasters. And this goes right back to the Victorian era. The Post Office saw sub-postmasters as a potential threat, as a potential weak point in the chain of their retention of public money. So what they saw the Horizon IT system was a window on the criminality that was happening within the Post Office network. What happened was that they got it completely wrong, and based on these IT figures went after innocent people because they were inept and incapable of investigating IT systems properly. So as a result, although there was money leaving the Post Office network, which could have been down to fraud by customers, it could have been down to back-end fraud, it could have been inside jobs, and it may well have been Post Office staff in limited circumstances. At the same time, they used the Horizon evidence to, in their mind, see or prove that there was criminality going on in the post office, and they got it completely and utterly wrong by going after the wrong people. And the other thing, which hasn't really been properly discussed, is that by messing up so catastrophically in this way, the post office has for years been unable to tell the difference between IT error on one hand and fraud on the other.
It's a fascinating insight. And I wonder, Nick, if you think that sort of sense among those in the post office that the postmasters might be the weak link in the chain in terms of them getting money in from the public went all the way through the post office to the ministers who were running the post office from a government point of view.
Well, the ministers were hopelessly incurious about the campaign from the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance and what their backbench MPs were telling them in Parliament. They believed time and again the word of the post office executives over the words of the campaigners. Some of them met with them, some of them listened to hear what they had to say, but when Second Sight came in and reported and found serious problems, they set up a mediation scheme, and this continued right up until Jo Swinson was the Postal Affairs Minister in 2015. And she was fully aware of this investigation, of course, because she'd probably sanctioned it. We don't know for sure, but she certainly referred to it in Parliament. And then Second Sight, these investigators, independent investigators, were peremptorily sacked by the Post Office. Now, whether that was done with government and ministerial approval is something that the public inquiry is going to bottom out over the course of the next few months. But there is culpability at a ministerial level, and certainly within government among civil servants, for what went wrong here.
So, Nick, just give us a sense then, in your estimation, of what needs to happen in the near term now for there to be correct redress for those people who were affected by this scandal.
Well, the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board, which is an independent body set up by the government to advise on the various compensation schemes, has already recommended to the Lord Chancellor that every single post office conviction is unsafe. They say it's not just to do with Horizon IT evidence. The investigations and prosecutions were so inept that none of them can be considered safe. So a blanket quashing of those convictions is something which is clearly on the agenda. Whether it will happen will be down to some very clever lawyers, no doubt, and whether there's any ministerial will to do this. But the speeding up of the compensation process has to be a priority for the government. They have to start recognising that people lost thousands and thousands of pounds. Their relationships broke down, their mental health suffered, their physical health suffered, and many of them are moving towards the end of their lives. We know already 60 people have died waiting for full and final compensation. The speed at which this process is moving needs to increase rapidly for there to be any sense of justice about this.
Nick, a final thought on the work of journalism and the work that you've had to do to keep this story in the headlines. And it's a story that many of us will know about, but it's sort of remarkable that it's had to reach this point where there's a drama on ITV to bring it back into the headlines so these people can get the redress that they really, really deserve.
I'm deeply honoured to be part of that production and proud of the journalism that went into it, which underpins it. It is a tribute to the writer, the director, the cast and the production team for bringing it alive and making it resonate with the public in the way that it did. But whilst people say, oh, it's only a drama, it's not. It's underpinned by facts. It says right at the beginning, this is a true story. And in order to be able to justify that statement, it has to be not just factually rigorous, but also true to the experience of the sub-postmasters who've supported it all the way through. It came around at exactly the right time, and I think that the public appetite was ripe for this kind of awareness-raising drama. And I'm delighted, frankly, that it's put it at the top of the news agenda again.
Yeah, and it's having the impact it needs to have. Right, Nick Wallis, appreciate you and appreciate your work. Thank you very much for being with us.